Hi guys, welcome back to the Social Tune, and today we're doing something a little bit different. You see, recently I've been running out of ways to talk about all the albums that I listen to, purely because I don't really have enough time for filming nowadays. And so in this video, I'm going to go through a number of albums that I've been listening to in the past couple of weeks, and giving my brief thoughts on each of them. And I'm going to call this series... Block Reviews? Music Maelstrom, Tune Tsunami, Social Summation, Record Roundup. Yeah, you know what? I'm sticking with that. And so let's dive in, starting with... Paramore's path to fame has been a very messy one indeed, with an uneven debut followed by a real rise in success, bleeding members left and right along the way, ultimately culminating in what many consider to be their best album, their self-titled 2013 release. And it was good, nothing revolutionary, and it did walk the line between pop and rock a little too finely. It also didn't help that the lyrics could be a little catty and cynical, even for Paramore, but it was definitely a solid effort that I did enjoy. But that was 4 years ago, and since then the band has been busy. Quite apart from bringing former members Zach Farrow back, the band was supposedly giving into pop entirely. Not according to them, but according to their fans. And while some people may have a problem with this, I certainly don't, especially if it means that the band will finally end their clingy relationship with rock music that has frankly felt a little tenuous over their past couple of releases. And I came out of this pretty damn happy. Because sure, while this album may not be boundary breaking or anything, it's easily the band's most fun, upbeat, and likable project in a long time. And for me, I really enjoyed it, more than I expected. The band abandons rock pretty much entirely and goes full synth pop. And if this had been released 2 years ago, I can guarantee it would have been huge. Mostly because so much of this album is so catchy. From the disco touches on Rose-Colored Boy and Told You So, to the aching sadness of 26. Then you have the sharp guitars, fantastic bouncy percussion, and the explosive chorus of the lead-off single Hard Times, easily one of the best songs on this album. Some of these hooks are some of Paramore's best. They hit some real highs here, and frankly the writing's improved as well. All across this project you get little nuggets of wisdom paired with Hayley Williams' struggle with depression, which as it turns out may be self-inflicted, because while she does remain a little catty and self-centered, she also cuts through her own bullshit a lot, especially on 26, where she flat out tells her former self to stop being such a buzzkill. And as I said, this album does have some catty moments like Fake Happy, and some weird failed experiments like No Friend where the vocals are barely audible, but overall, this is easily one of my favorite Paramore projects, getting a light 8 out of 10. Great job guys, stick to this lane and you'll go far.
Don't matter what you say, don't matter what you do, I only wanna do bad things to you. So good that you can't explain it.
And from a pretty great album, we go to this steaming pile of dog shit. I've been aware of Machine Gun Kelly for a number of years now, and I have never liked him. At his best, his flow's okay and decently aggressive. But if you compare him in either of those categories to easily his biggest influence, Eminem, and no, not just because they're both white, Machine Gun Kelly falls laughably short. And ever since he broke through with his big crossover hit with the worst element of Fifth Harmony, I have been dreading this album. But even with all of that in mind, I wasn't quite prepared for just how much I loathed this. Because say what you will about Kodak Black, at least his awful abomination of a project painting pictures can be broadly defined as rap music. And say what you will about Lil Yachty, at least his project Teenage Emotions had 2 good songs on it. But absolutely everything about this project fucking infuriated me. When Machine Gun Kelly bothers to rap at all on this album, it's with a slow, plodding delivery on songs like Wake and Bake and Bad Things that bores me to tears, and the rest of the time, like in the case of the latter, you have to deal with his awful singing, which is probably at its worst on the atrocious and emotionally confused Rehab, a song that I almost appreciated until I figured out that his delivery was actually meant to convey happiness, and just no. The only somewhat decent songs on this album are The Gunner and Let You Go, where on the former the percussion is cranked up to 11, making the chorus a cacophonous mess, and the latter contains absolutely no rapping and sounds unbelievably cheap. Plus, it's a song about a breakup where he conveys all the emotion of a wooden spoon. And even when he does bother to rap, he has an absolute crap ton of awful lines. From the multiple times where he mispronounces ramen noodles, to the constant claims that he's on top of the game when he's nowhere close, which makes even less sense on the atrocious Golden God, where he repeatedly says that he's almost famous, while simultaneously claiming that he's this generation's David Bowie. Fuck off! Seriously, I could go on ranting about this album for a while yet, but it isn't even worth that, or any more of your time. So basically, to cut a very long story short, it's a 2 out of 10, easily the worst project that I've heard thus far this year. Avoid this fucking piece of trash at all costs.
Sail away today, we fight and there will be no mercy for those with no grave. No grave but the sea.
So, as some of you may know, the latest installment from the Pirates of the Caribbean series was recently released. The 5th installment, called Dead Men Tell No Tales. Although for some reason the screening that I saw called it Salazar's Revenge, which I don't really get, but I digress. It's an odd, awkward, often cringy popcorn movie that is about as good as the 4th one, if not just a little bit worse. Now, the reason that I bring this up is that one of the bands that I'm covering today is Alestorm, a power and folk metal act from Scotland who, ever since 2008, have been releasing albums as part of the subgenre that I like to call pirate metal. Basically, this is their 5th release about swashbuckling on the high seas. Drinking, sailing, adventuring, drinking, pillaging, fighting, and have I mentioned drinking? And let me be absolutely clear, if you think that power metal is too cheesy most of the time, you are not ready for these guys. They're blunt as hell and not the best songwriters. The instrumentation is about what you'd expect, above average but not amazing, with some absolutely incredible solos. And as for what separates this from their other projects, there's not much. There's a song on this album called Fucked by an Anchor, which is about exactly what you think, where our protagonist is cursed by a witch of the sea and can't stop himself from constantly swearing and performing other perverted acts. And apart from that, nothing much has changed. The hooks are pretty great on songs like the title track To the End of the World and Treasure Island, but not so much on Pegleg Potion and Bar und Imbis, which I'm absolutely sure is misspelt, by the way. The instrumentation is pretty solid across the board, and the themes range from fighting a terrible storm on songs like To the End of the World and Man the Pumps, where our protagonist straight up dies on the latter, in a really weird shift in tone that I didn't really get, to the drinking and partying on Bar und Imbis, Alestorm, and the kind of insensitive and cliched Mexico. This is an album where you need a particular sense of humor in order to enjoy it. And luckily, I do have that sense of humor, to an extent. It's really dumb, and possibly in the weaker half of their discography, but while it takes absolutely no risks, it also doesn't half-ass it. It goes all out and straight up in your face with everything it does. So, it's a solid 6 out of 10. Give this a listen if you're a fan of the band or just curious. There really is no reason not to. So, Jack Antonoff, former, possibly current member of the band Fun, boyfriend to Lena Dunham, God help him, who over the past couple of years has risen to be one of the most in-demand pop producers working today. He was responsible for a bulk of the production on Taylor Swift's album 1989, as well as Lord's new sophomore album Melodrama. And in 2014, he released his first studio album, Strange Desire. An album that I loved more for the strength of individual songs rather than the project as a whole. And in keeping with that tradition, this album has some absolutely fantastic highs and a couple of duds. The anthemic choruses of the Lord-assisted Don't Take the Money, I Miss Those Days, and Everybody Lost Somebody have already received a bunch of praise from a lot of critics, but there's also a couple of other songs that I personally feel deserve a lot more attention. And to explain why, we need to take a quick look at the story, which seems to be about our protagonist finding himself in a relationship which he commits to far too quickly and suddenly, abandoning everything else he has in the process. And years later, he looks back on his life and realizes just what a waste it all was. Basically, this album's story is about how love isn't always the greatest thing in the world and how idiotic it can be to throw one's life away for someone who just provides you with a brief moment of comfort. And while I'm not a big fan of this mentality, I will say that Jack Antonoff perfectly portrays both the cynic and the romantic in this story. Nothing Is You and Hate That You Know Me So Well portray his mild exasperation and love for this girl, with Carly Rae Jepsen providing backing vocals on the latter and sounding great. And meanwhile, the burst of affection he feels as he proposes to this girl on Let's Get Married is so full of raw passion, and yet you can clearly see that he's doing this for all the wrong reasons, as he proclaims that he just doesn't want to be lonely, which is simultaneously perfectly understandable and human. And so ultimately, this album earns a strong 7 out of 10. Definitely take some time to check this out. But in the end, you may just want to check out his debut. It's a better album overall, and frankly, there's not a song here that tops I Wanna Get Better. That song is just a masterpiece.
Swish, swish, bish. Another one in the basket.
I'll be honest, I've been dreading this album. Not only were most of the lead-off singles absolutely awful, but Katy Perry's star has clearly fallen far, as all of these songs have flopped hard. I mean, it's kind of telling that all of the lead-off singles to this album were the songs that had features on them. And look, when I was checking out this album on YouTube, I saw a comment that said that Katy Perry was stepping out of her comfort zone. Which is certainly true, but let me stress, this isn't always a good thing. Because in her quest to make her music more relevant, Katy Perry abandoned what made her music so great to begin with, namely her sense of fun. The most enjoyable song on this album is the catty kiss-off anthem Swish Swish, a song that has some good piano and vocal delivery that then breaks into a minor tropical beat that doesn't sound bad by any means, but also kind of feels like another Dark Horse-esque mid-2000s ripoff. And if you want one of the worst songs here, probably the worst, you have Chained to the Rhythm, which sure, on the surface is a catchy song about how we're living in a fake utopian society, but dear God, does it feel preachy. And plus, if there's someone who should not be preaching about the evils of mindless pop music, it's Katy Perry. And with Bon Appetit being a failed attempt at a sex song which frankly feels and sounds unclean, I was ready to hate this project. And yet, I'm not sure I can, because while there are some awful songs here, there are also just enough good ones that I can kind of give it a pass. Swish Swish is a real grower. The title track is a really nice blend of piano and tropical beats, with lyrics about seeking that loved one for support. It also helps that, even though this album does head in some weird directions, it's still essentially Katy Perry, who I do like. Even on Bon Appetit, you could make the argument that she's being her usual tasteless self. while Chained to the Rhythm sucks because it's anything but. Although even then, she does get more self-reflective on Bigger Than Me, which is a lot more tolerable, mostly because she's only speaking for herself and not everyone else. And then of course there's the feminist anthem, Hey Hey Hey, where Katy Perry compares herself to Marilyn Monroe in a monster truck, and says that people think that she's fragile like a Fabergé, but she'll show them. But as for the good songs, you do have the pretty sincere sentiment of Missing Your Ex on Miss You More, which actually has a pretty interesting message of loving someone more in hindsight than when you are actually in the relationship. And hell, I really did like the writing on Roulette, as both her and her partner are taking the risk, even if that chorus was just plain bad, as well as the repeated nightmare of the toxic relationship that refuses to end on Déjà Vu. Really, most of these songs range from meh, like Power, Mind Maze, and Tsunami, to actually pretty good. But ultimately, there are enough good songs here to balance out this project to a strong 5 out of 10. This album will probably flop hard, but personally, I didn't mind hearing it. And that does it for this week's Record Roundup. Let me know what you think of this idea as well as these albums. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and if there are any other albums that you'd like me to review, please post them in the comments or tweet them at me at The Social Tune, link in the description. Please subscribe so you don't miss a thing, and until the next time, I'm Finn, and this is The Social Tune, signing off.